What happens when the person who abandons the family suddenly shows up after the funeral and tries to take everything? Amelia spent 14 months caring for her dying mother alone, while her adopted brother visited only 3 times. But just 2 days after she moved into her new beach condo, he took her house keys and told her he was dropping her at a shelter. What he didn't know was that her father left behind one file, powerful enough to destroy every assumption he had about the family fortune. This isn't just a family drama, it's a masterclass in emotional manipulation, grief, and quiet revenge.
My name is Amelia Vance. I'm 33, and in just 7 months, I buried both my parents. I sold our family home in Savannah and bought a small condo on Tybee Island, just a walk from the beach. On my second morning there, before a single pan was unpacked, my adopted brother Liam walked in, took my keys from the hook, and pocketed them. "You can't afford this," he said flatly. "I'm heading to Charleston tomorrow with Chloe's family. I'll drop you at a shelter." I didn't say a word. An hour later, I texted him 5 words. "Check Dad's Jefferson file." He called me back in under 3 minutes. But what unfolded over the next 28 days, that was the twist nobody, least of all me, could have predicted. Welcome back. This channel is for women who set boundaries the right way, with documents, dignity, and the courage to stay calm while everyone else is screaming. If you've been the one doing the work while the rest of your family just waits to inherit, this story is for you. Drop a comment, subscribe, and stay with me. You won't believe what happens at that beach reception. The 14 months before my mother died were the longest of my life. Stage 4 ovarian cancer. By the time they found it, treatment was about comfort, not a cure. I asked my boss at Dawson and Finch, the historic preservation firm where I'd worked for 10 years, if I could switch to remote. He agreed immediately. So I packed my drafting table and laptop into the guest room on Abercorn Street and moved back home. My mother's name was Eleanor. She was a librarian for 27 years before she got sick. We had to turn my old bedroom into a makeshift hospice room. The hospital bed arrived on a Tuesday. The low hum of the oxygen machine became the soundtrack to our lives for the next year. I learned how to change out a cannula at 3 a.m. in the dark. I figured out which pharmacy delivered the cheapest nutrition drinks. I learned my mother's hand squeeze could say, "I love you," when her voice was gone. My brother Liam visited exactly 3 times. I need to be clear about that because later on, everyone said, people grieve in their own way. 3 visits in 14 months, maybe 2 hours a pop. His wife, Chloe, never once stepped inside the house. One time she just idled in the driveway with the car running while he came in. He only stayed 40 minutes that day. I wasn't angry back then. Anger requires energy I just didn't have. My entire world was a legal pad on the counter with lists like order more tubing and refill pain meds. The real me, the one with feelings, was packed away somewhere. I told myself I'd deal with her later. In reality, Dad died first, a sudden heart attack that January. He was out pruning his azaleas. Our neighbour found him in the garden. I drove home from the office and sat with him until the funeral home came. Mom watched from the kitchen window, too weak to come out. She didn't break down until 2 days later, choosing a casket. She laid her hand on a simple oak box and whispered, "He would have hated those silver handles." After that, it was just us. Just me, her, the books she could no longer read, and the cancer. Mom died in October, a Tuesday morning, with her hand on top of mine. The hospice nurse, a kind woman named Anita, sat with me for 2 hours after. She didn't say a word, she just stayed. I will always remember that. The funeral was that Saturday at Bonnevere Cemetery. Light rain, about 40 people in dark coats. I'd handled everything myself, the flowers, the programs, the soloist. I'd written the obituary at 1 a.m. over a cold cup of tea. Liam arrived 20 minutes late. Chloe was driving, and the first thing she said was, "I told you the traffic would be a nightmare." She kissed my cheek, something she'd never done before. "Amelia," she whispered, "I'm so sorry for your loss." It was the most personal sentence she'd ever directed at me. Liam hugged me. I let him. He was wearing an expensive new cologne that didn't suit him at all. He'd gained weight, and his eyes were red. He cried at the service, and Chloe patted his hand twice. After, people came back to the house for sandwiches. I hired a local teenager to help serve. I was rinsing glasses at the sink when Chloe cornered me. She had a woman with her I'd never met, mid-60s, perfect blonde hair. Chloe introduced her as her mother, Diana Caldwell. She drove up from Charleston just for this. Diana took my hand. "Sweetheart, we are so terribly sorry." Her grip was firm, holding on a second too long. Then, Chloe asked, completely casual, "Amelia, did your mom happen to say anything about her jewelry? Any specific pieces?" I set down the glass I was washing. I didn't respond. I just picked up the empty platter of sandwiches, walked it to the dining room and refilled it. When I got back to the kitchen, Liam was standing in the doorway, staring at me. He had come down from the second floor, from the hallway near my dad's study. I hadn't even seen him go up there. "You okay?" I asked him. "Yeah," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "Just looking around." 3 months later, we were all sitting in the conference room of Bryant & Associates, the small law firm in downtown Savannah that managed my parents' estate. Thomas Bryant read the will out loud. He was in his 70s, kind, the sort of lawyer who still wore a tie clip. The will was clear. The house on Abercorn Street and all its contents went to me. A codicil, notarized 14 months before Mom died, stated the bequest recognised my role as primary caregiver for both parents in their final years. The investment accounts, life insurance, my dad's truck, and their savings were split 60-40, with the larger share going to Liam. Thomas explained the values were roughly equal, considering the house's appraisal. The intent was balance. Liam's forehead went bright red. He said nothing. But Chloe did. Her hand went up. "Mr. Bryant, sorry. So, this is the only valid version? There's no earlier one?" Thomas said, "This is the only executed will." Chloe gave a slow nod. "Got it, just making sure." I didn't say a word in that room. I signed the papers, shook Thomas's hand, and walked out to the parking lot. Liam and Chloe followed behind me. At my car, Chloe caught up and put her hand on my forearm. Her wedding ring was new, the stone much larger than I remembered. "Amelia," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "We should all talk. A family meeting. Let's be honest about splitting this so no one feels weird." I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her face. "The will is what Dad wrote," I told her. I didn't. Her smile tightened as she let go. That afternoon, I went back to my office and made certified copies of everything. Then I drove to the bank and opened a safe deposit box. I slid the copies inside myself. Back at the house that night, I found a small brass key on a hook by the back door, the key to my dad's old desk drawer. I didn't open it. Not yet. 5 months passed. I lived there alone, working from the kitchen table. I kept Dad's study door shut. I left Mom's reading chair empty in the den. I washed the sheets in my old room every 2 weeks, but it took 3 cycles before the smell of the hospice finally faded. One Saturday in May, I was standing in the living room holding a coffee cup, just staring at the wallpaper. Faded floral stripes from 1991. Dad had wanted to replace it for decades. I suddenly knew I couldn't spend another day there. The house wasn't my home anymore. It was a museum of grief, and I was the only person visiting. I called a real estate agent that Monday. We listed on Wednesday and held an open house that Sunday. We had 3 offers by Tuesday. I accepted the 4th, a young couple expecting their second child. The husband grew up just a few streets away. $410,000 with a 35-day closing. I didn't bother telling Liam until the contract was signed. I called him from my car in a grocery store parking lot, the kind of call where you don't want a long debate. "You're selling Mom and Dad's house?" His voice was tight. "It's not their house anymore," I said. "The will says it's mine, and I can't stay there. I'm using the money to buy a place on Tybee." A long pause. I heard Chloe's muffled voice in the background. When Liam came back on the line, he sounded totally different. "Honey," he said, a word he'd never used with me before. "We need to talk about that inheritance. Chloe and I have some ideas, and we could really use produdging." "I gotta go," I interrupted, and I hung up. I should have known right then and there. Any normal sibling would have tipped me off, but I'd spent 14 months pretending not to drown, and you can't just quit pretending. So I kept moving. I packed the house in 8 weeks, found the condo in Corolla in 3, closed cash, $340,000 for a 1-bedroom on the 4th floor, 2 blocks from the Currituck Sound. Moving day was the first weekend of June. I hadn't opened the lockbox. I almost did, twice, but decided to wait. The movers finished before noon. 8 boxes from Greenville. The only 2 pieces of furniture I kept were Mom's reading chair and Dad's cedar lockbox. I'd made sure they loaded the box onto the truck personally, so it wouldn't get damaged. It had been in the corner of his office since I was a little girl. He built it himself in 1991 from leftover barn cedar. 22 inches long, 16 wide, 10 deep, with brass corners. He'd installed a small lock with a tiny brass key. The movers set it on the second shelf in my bedroom closet. I closed the door, and the cedar smell stayed inside like a secret. After they left, I just stood on the balcony. The condo's small, 640 square feet 1-bedroom, a galley kitchen, a balcony big enough for 2 chairs. It's not the ocean, it's the Currituck Sound, but you can smell the salt from up here. And on a clear day, you can see the Corolla lighthouse. The HOA fees were $315 a month. I'd run the budget 4 times. I could manage it on my salary. I'd actually done it. At the end of the day, I walked down to the beach. The June sun was low and gold. I sat on the sand in my work pants and just let the wind blow my hair around. And for the first time in 5 months, since Mom died, I cried. Not a big ugly cry, just quiet tears that didn't ask permission. I felt grief. But under the grief was something else, lightness. Like I'd have finally set down a heavy suitcase I'd been carrying for years. I could just walk away. That night, I slept for 9 straight hours. The first solid 9 hours in over a year. I'd given Trent the visitor code for the lobby 2 weeks ago when he'd asked. He called offering to help him move. I said no, but the offer was a nice gesture. I gave him the code anyway, just in case of an emergency. He'd said, "Cool, I'll save it." I thought tomorrow I would finally wake up free. The cedar box just sat in the closet. I told myself I'd open it on Saturday. I finally had the time. Sunday morning, June 2nd, I woke up at 7, made coffee, and took my mug onto the balcony. The water was perfectly still. A heron was standing in the Chassatos, 200 yards away, completely motionless, just doing what herons do at 7 in the morning. I sat there in my robe, letting the steam rise from my cup. I thought I could do this every single day for the rest of my life. At 9:14, a red Ford F-150 pulled into the visitor lot. I noticed because the lot was almost empty, and the truck parked diagonally across 2 spaces, just like Trent always does. I watched from the balcony. Trent got out, wearing a polo shirt and shorts. Then the passenger door opened. Whit, in white capri pants and an oversized purse. They walked to the entrance. Trent punched the visitor code into the keypad. I'd given him that code 2 weeks earlier for emergencies. I watched him use it now like he owned the place, and I felt my stomach slowly start to turn. The knock came 40 seconds later. They'd taken the elevator straight up. No call from the lobby, no call from the parking lot, no call the night before to say they were coming. They just showed up. I opened the door, still in my robe. Trent brushed past me into the living room. He scanned the room like he was about to buy it, then sat down in my new armchair. Whit followed him inside. She closed the door behind her. Then she locked the deadbolt without even asking. Then she gave me that soft smile, the same one she used at the funeral. "This is cute, Iris," Whit said. "Really cute." I should have seen it in the way he sat down, the way she locked my door, the way he put his sunglasses on my coffee table next to my book, as if it was his table. I still poured them both coffee. That was the person I was on the first day of June. Trent took the mug, but didn't drink it. He set it down and leaned back. "So, look," he started. "Whit and I were talking last night. And honestly, Iris, this whole thing, the condo, the move, it's a lot for someone on their own. This is a lot of space and a big monthly payment for one person who just lost their parents. It's 640 square feet. I said. And the math works. Whit jumped in, her voice soft and sad. Sweetheart, this is too much for you alone. We've been so worried. Trent stood up and walked over to the entry table where my keys were sitting in a little bowl. 2 keys on a ring for the front door and the mailbox. He picked them up, looked at them, then slid them into the inside pocket of his jacket and zipped it closed. I watched him do it. You don't need this house, Trent said, turning back to me. He was using the same voice our dad used on the dog when it misbehaved. Tomorrow, I'm heading to Asheville for the week with Whit's family. I can drop you at a shelter on the way out of town. Whit nodded. Just for a few weeks, so we can figure this all out rationally. Bart said he could help us list the condo. I tilted my head. Bart? My brother, the realtor. He thinks we can get $380,000 for this place. Maybe more. Just let us help you, sweetheart. I noticed her phone screen was lit up on the couch. A Zillow agent notification. Listing draft. The address was 4127 Soundfront Way, Unit 412. My address. She saw me see it and flipped the phone face down. I didn't say a word. Then I said, okay. They both just stared at me, totally surprised. Okay? Trent repeated. You have the keys, I said. So I think we're done here. For a solid 30 seconds, nobody moved. I think they expected me to beg or cry or get small. That's what the old version of me would have done. The exhausted girl still grieving. I'm sure Whit had her whole compassionate speech rehearsed. Mediation, family compromise, a gentle hand on my arm. But I just stood there, holding my coffee. Iris, Whit said carefully. We're just trying to help you. I heard you, I said. Trent looked at his wife. She looked at her phone, still face down. He looked back at me. So, you're cool with this? He asked. You're cool with us handling things? I think you should go, I said. You've got a long drive to Asheville tomorrow. You'll need your rest. Iris, honey, Whit tried again, moving toward me for a hug. I took one step back. Not a big dramatic move, just a neat step back into the kitchen, putting the counter between us. She stopped. Okay, she said, her voice suddenly bright. Okay, we'll call you tonight. We'll get this sorted out. They walked out. Trent grabbed his sunglasses from the coffee table. Whit picked up her purse and phone. He paused at the door, like he wanted to say something fatherly, but couldn't think of anything. And then he was gone. The deadbolt was still locked from when Whit had turned it. I unlocked it, opened the door, and watched them walk to the elevator. He pushed the button without looking back. The doors closed. I shut my door. I locked the deadbolt myself this time. I went to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a small plastic bag taped to the back. Inside was a second set of keys to the condo. I had them made the day I closed. A decade at a probate law firm teaches you to always have a spare. I sat down and made another coffee. Then I picked up my phone and pulled up Trent's contact. I looked at his picture, an old one of him at 17, arm around my shoulders at his graduation. I was 12 in that photo. I'd cropped it so it was just us, no parents in the frame, back when I liked having an older brother. I tapped the message box and typed 5 words. Look inside Dad's lockbox. I read it, then sent it. 4 minutes passed. 4 minutes and 12 seconds, according to the microwave clock. The phone vibrated. Trent's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, muted the phone, and then I called Carolyn Pute's cell. Carolyn was the senior partner at Pute and Hayes. She'd hired me 10 years ago when I was 23, and a legal assistant certificate was the only thing on my resume. She taught me how to challenge a will, how a codicil works, how to read a property deed in under 90 seconds. She was 58, divorced twice, and always answered her cell, even on Sundays. Iris, what's wrong? He came over, I said. He took my keys. He threatened to put me in a shelter. There was a short silence on her end, the kind a lawyer makes when deciding whether to be a lawyer or a friend. All right, she said. My office. Monday morning, 8:30. Bring your phone and the texts. Don't respond. Don't argue. Let it play out. It's already started. My lawyer's voice was firm. The will's in box 247 at Crestwood. Get the copies. I will, I promised, and hung up. I grabbed a legal pad, the kind I'd brought from Oak Ridge. It used to be for tracking Dad's meds. Now, my list was different. Monday, Crestwood 247, Eleanor 8:30. Concierge, do not let Leo up. Recce locks tonight. I double underlined that last one. I called Seaview Locksmiths in Ocean View and booked a 5 o'clock appointment. The first voicemail from Leo hit at 11:43, one of 5 that day. I let them all go to the machine, noting the time of each call. After listening, I jotted down a quick summary for each one. I never replied. 11:43, Chloe. What's Cedar Chest? I have no idea what you're on about. Call me. This is stupid. My note. Confused. Trying to sound casual. 12:17. Look, I'm done with these games. Savannah thinks you're just trying to mess with us. Call me. My note. Annoyed. I could practically hear Savannah coaching him. 1:55. I just spoke with Savannah's mom. She thinks you're ungrateful. I said you've had a tough year. Call. My note. Triangulating. Pulling Margaret in. 4:22. Chloe. If I don't hear from you today, I'm calling a lawyer. I'm dead serious. We have rights, too. My note. An empty threat. But it was on the record. 8:09. I'm driving to Oakridge in the morning. If there's a chest at the old house, I'll get it. Whatever you think is inside, it's not just yours. You can't keep things from family. I played that one back twice, not because it scared me, but to get the exact words for Eleanor. I wrote it down verbatim. Whatever you think is inside, it's not just yours. I underlined it. He had no idea the house sale closed on the 28th. The new family moved in yesterday. The old cedar chest wasn't at 25 Archer Lane anymore. It was sitting on the top shelf of my closet. He would find an empty room and a new father painting walls for a nursery. At 5 sharp, the locksmith arrived. 45 minutes and $210 later, I had a new deadbolt and new keys. I taped them inside a kitchen drawer. The next morning, I made the 2-hour drive to Oakridge to open safety deposit box 247. The Crestwood branch was quiet for a Monday. I'd called ahead. Susan, the manager I'd known for years, walked me back to the vault. No small talk. She unlocked the room, slid the box out, set it on the table, and quietly left. I sat down and put on my glasses. I lifted the lid. 3 items. First was a certified copy of my parents' last will, signed the July before Mom passed, and the codicil, signed in October, just 3 weeks before her diagnosis became terminal. The codicil was specific about the house, its contents, and the reason, in recognition of Chloe's role as primary caregiver. An attached affidavit from their lawyer, Alan Pierce, confirmed my parents were of sound mind and not under any pressure. The second was a handwritten letter from my father. 2 pages, on notebook paper, in his precise engineering script, dated just 6 weeks before he died. It started, Chloe, your mother and I see who has truly held this family together. He wrote for 2 pages, calm and detailed, about how he and Mom had been watching. They saw who came to the hospital back in 2019 when he had his gallbladder removed. They saw who picked up the phone every single Sunday. They saw who gave up her own life for 40 months and never complained. The last line of the letter was simple. Don't let him take this house. It's for you. Promise me. The third item was a sealed cream envelope. My mother's handwriting on the front said, Chloe, read this when you need to. Not a moment sooner. I didn't open it. Not yet. I put it back with the will and Dad's letter and took photos of everything with my phone, both sides of every page. Before I even left the vault, I emailed the photos to Eleanor. I locked the box back up. These papers didn't smell like cedar. They smelled of cold air and polish, like facts, like truth. 2 days later, my apartment buzzer shrieked. Not the one for the lobby, the one at my door, meaning someone had bypassed the front desk. I peered through the peephole. It was Margaret Vance, standing there in a bright linen dress, holding a casserole dish. She saw the peephole go dark and smiled. Chloe? Sweetheart, it's Margaret. Can I come in for just a moment? I opened the door, but only a few inches. How did you get upstairs? Oh, a nice young man buzzed me in. I told him I was visiting my daughter-in-law's sister. I let her in, but only as far as the entryway. I closed the door, then led her to the balcony and motioned for her to sit. I remained standing, keeping the sliding door open. She placed the casserole dish on the small table. The lid had a label, Margaret Vance, Family Picnic 2024. It's still warm, she said, chicken and rice. My special recipe for trying times. How kind. For the next 20 minutes, she talked about forgiveness and family. She talked about how Leo was distraught. She talked about regret being a heavy burden to carry into your 70s. She mentioned compromises. She called me sweetheart 11 times. I was counting. Finally, she leaned in, placing a hand on my knee. Chloe, honey, she said, family shouldn't have secrets. We're all just trying to find our way back. I ignored that. Instead, I asked Mrs. Vance, should I put this casserole in the fridge? She blinked, thrown off. Oh yes, that would be lovely, sweetheart. I took the dish inside. On the middle shelf, I saw a note tucked under the lid. I peeked without opening it. 3 words in her handwriting. Call your brother. I left the note where it was, went back to the balcony and stood by the door. Mrs. Vance, I said, I think it's time for you to leave. She left. That evening, my phone blew up. I'd been pulled back into the family group chat, the Vance clan. I'd quietly left it months ago, needing peace. They added me back without asking. The members: Leo, Savannah, Margaret, Savannah's older brother Brent, his wife Lisa, and someone I didn't know named Marissa Vance, a cousin from out of state. It was 6 of them against me. 47 messages in 2 hours. Savannah, 8:13. Hey Chloe, we're all so worried. Please just let us know you're okay. Leo, 8:15. Chloe, seriously. Margaret, 8:20. Family, let's remember grief is complicated. We must be patient with Chloe, but also firm. She needs our support. Brent, 8:31. Hey Chloe, quick note. I run Vance Properties. I can list the condo in 48 hours. Have a buyer looking right now. Just say the word. I stared at that one. A sales pitch in the family grief chat. Savannah 906. She always was the golden child. Now she's just entitled. Sorry, but it's true. Margaret, 9:10. Savannah 9:11. I said I was sorry. Lisa, 9:22. Sending love and light to all. Marissa, 9:45. Just reading everything. So sorry you're all dealing with this. Chloe, sweetheart, remember family is forever. Material things aren't. I screenshotted every single message and emailed them in batches to Eleanor. I muted the chat but didn't leave. Eleanor had told me not to. Let them talk, she'd said. Let them put it all in writing. That's what we need. That night, I sat on my balcony and listened to the ocean. The lights from the other condos glowed below me. The new residents' welcome reception was on Saturday. I knew they'd all be there. If you've been following along, you can feel what's coming. That moment, the quiet one lays down the proof. To feel it with me, drop a 1-word comment. Just type chest so I know you're still here. And please subscribe. The reception was 6 days away. Wednesday at 8:30, I was back in Eleanor's office at Hayes and Sterling. She had cleared her schedule. On her monitors, she reviewed the will, the codicil, Dad's letter, my transcripts of the voicemails, all 47 chat screenshots, the lobby security video from Sunday that David the concierge sent me, and the realty listing screenshot I'd snapped from Savannah's phone. Caroline scribbled on a yellow legal pad. Just like mine, we had the same mentor, years apart. She put her pen down. Iris, your case is solid, she said. There's no equity claim here. The will is specific. The witnesses are credible, and the affidavit is rock solid. Trent can get a lawyer. He won't, but he could, and any lawyer will tell him to just walk away. Witt's brother is exposed for illegal solicitation under North Carolina real estate law. Diane could be sued for deliberately spreading false information to your neighbours. We won't sue. We send cease and desist letters. We document everything, and we move on with our lives. Okay, I'll have those letters drafted by Friday. 4 envelopes, 1 for each of them, ready to be served. She paused, taking off her glasses. Iris, can I ask you something as a friend, not as your lawyer? Sure. Why didn't you do this 6 months ago? I thought about it. I was just tired, I said, and I wanted them to make a better choice. I kept thinking if I just stayed quiet, Trent might read the will and his dad's letter and finally choose to be my brother. I didn't want to be the one to escalate it. She nodded. And now, she said, now I want you to be my +1 on Saturday at 6 for the condo's welcome reception. She gave a tiny smile, just a little smirk at the corner of her mouth. Iris, I'd love to. That same Wednesday at 2:40, my phone buzzed. A security app notification from the lobby camera. A visitor was arriving for Unit 412. I tapped it open. It was Trent, standing at the front desk. Behind him, a man in a navy work shirt with a yellow patch held a small tool bag. The patch had read Coastal Lock and Key, the same company I'd already used. I almost laughed. Of all the locksmiths in Corolla, and there are only 4, Trent picked the one whose number was already in my phone from Sunday night. I called Robert at the desk. "Do not let him up here," I said. "He does not have authorization." "Yes, ma'am," Robert said. I switched the app back to the camera and watched it all on mute. Trent was arguing. His neck was red, his hands flailing. The locksmith just stood behind him, looking patient like a man who's seen this exact drama before. Robert said something calmly, gesturing with one hand. Trent slapped his palm on the desk. The locksmith took a small step back. After about 8 minutes, the locksmith said something to Trent, shook his head, and walked right out. Trent stayed for another 4 minutes, arguing by himself. Then Robert picked up his phone, and I felt my own phone buzz in my hand. "Mrs. Utton, your brother is demanding a key from the master file." I told him I don't have one. "You don't?" I asked. "I changed the cylinder on Sunday." "Yes, ma'am," I figured. "He's also claiming you're emotionally unstable and that he's worried for your safety." "I'm fine, Robert. I'm sitting here on my balcony watching him on camera." Robert chuckled. "All right then, I'll show him out." The keys Trent had swiped from my entry table on Sunday were useless now. The new set was in my kitchen drawer, taped right where I could see them. I'd had Coastal, the same shop he called, rekey my deadbolt before the sun even set that day. I kept the receipt. I was about to be very glad I did. Thursday morning, I was in the elevator heading to the mailroom when the doors opened on the 3rd floor, and an older woman, maybe 70, stepped inside. She had short white hair, oval gold glasses, and a tote bag from the Outer Banks Public Library. I'd seen her a few times in the hall. "Hi," she said. "Marge Holcomb. I'm in 306, Iris Utton, 412. She looked at me closely. "Iris," she said, "I think we should have a quick chat before Saturday." The doors opened to the lobby. We walked out. She nodded to Robert and led me over to a seating area by the front windows. "Honey," Marge said, sitting down and patting the cushion next to her, "I've had 2 different women in this building call me this week about you, asking if I'd heard anything, asking if you seemed okay. Both of them said they were called by a woman named Diane, who claimed to be concerned about you. Diane said you just lost your parents and were acting unstable. She wanted to know if anyone in the building had seen anything strange." My jaw tightened. "That's my brother's mother-in-law." Marge nodded slowly. I figured. I was a court reporter for 31 years up in Norfolk before I retired down here. "Iris, I know a smear campaign when I hear one." She tried it with me too. I told her I'd just met you, you seemed perfectly fine, and she could call me back when she got a more interesting hobby. I managed a small smile. "The first real one in 3 days. The reception is Saturday at 6, Marge said. "I'm at table 4. I have an empty seat right next to me. You take it, bring your lawyer if you have one. I have a feeling you do." "I do." "Then you're all set, sweetheart. I'll have the chair waiting." She patted my arm, stood up, and walked away with her library tote bag. I just watched her go. I went back up to my apartment and laid out my navy dress for Saturday. That Thursday evening, after the sun set behind the building and the sky turned grey, I opened the closet in my bedroom and pulled the cedar lockbox down from the top shelf. I set it on the floor and sat cross-legged in front of it, just like I did with the Christmas tree when I was 6 years old. The cedar smell filled the air like a held breath being released. It smelled like my dad's workshop of resin and pencil shavings. For just a second, I had to close my eyes. I unlocked it with the little brass key. I lifted the lid. I'd put Mom's sealed envelope in a safety deposit box on Monday. But I hadn't taken anything out of the cedar box itself when I'd moved. The box held my dad's little treasures. His old watch, the wedding ring, a couple of photos of him as a young soldier, a small wooden bird he carved the year I was born. All of it had been sitting right here. But on the lids inside, tucked in a canvas pocket I'd never seen in 25 years, was another envelope, cream-coloured paper with Mom's handwriting. It had the same message, Iris, read when you need it, and not a moment before. She'd made 2, one for the safe deposit box, one for here, just to be sure. I pulled it free. I broke the seal with my thumb. 2 pages. The letter was calm, clear, written in the same pen she used for her grocery lists. It said that by the time I was reading this, someone would be telling me I owed them more than the will stated, and that they'd wrap their demands in words like family and love. She told me not to fall for it. She wrote, "Your father and I wrote that will with our eyes wide open. We saw who was there for us, and we saw who wasn't. Setting boundaries isn't a betrayal, Iris. It's the last gift I can give you." I read it 3 times. That Friday morning, my lawyer Caroline emailed me the drafts. 4 separate cease and desist letters on her firm's official letterhead. Each one was specific. Each one was signed. Letter A went to my cousin, Trent. It listed his unauthorized actions: entering my house, taking my keys, trying to change the locks without permission, the threatening voidismil spools. It demanded he stop all contact except through our lawyers. It would be sent by certified mail. Letter B was for his wife, Whitney. Same basic warning, plus the unauthorized real estate listing draft, which Caroline had screenshotted from a public Zillow agent portal I didn't even know she could access. Letter C was to Diane. Cease and desist. It also had a separate paragraph about the privacy violation of calling my neighbours to spread lies about my mental health. Caroline had cited the exact state law. I read the citation twice. It felt good to read it. Letter D was for Bart, with a cease and desist, plus a draft of a complaint to the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. A copy was enclosed about the unauthorized solicitation and using a relative's coercion to get a listing. I printed all 4 of them. I addressed each envelope by hand to make it more personal. I sealed them in 4 legal-sized envelopes, white, labelled neatly in black ink. I placed the 4 envelopes in my canvas tote bag, the same one I'd taken to the safety deposit box, the one that smelled just a little like cedar. I called Caroline at 4 o'clock. Saturday is firm for 6 p.m. Meet me in the lobby at 5:45. I'll be in a navy dress. I'll be in a black blazer, she said. So we'll match. I laughed. And then I nearly cried because I hadn't really laughed in months. I went to bed at 9 that night with the tote bag on the chair, right next to my bed, with the letters tucked safely inside. I didn't plan on handing them out, unless I absolutely had to. I would only give them out if all 4 of them showed up at the reception and tried to make a scene. Caroline and I had agreed, and I knew, the way you just know things, that they were going to make me. Saturday, I woke up at 6:15. The sky was silver. The herons were back. I made coffee and scrambled 2 eggs, eating at the small table by the sliding glass door. I'd already laid out the dress the night before. Navy blue, knee-length, with 3/4 sleeves, and low-heeled black pumps that wouldn't make me taller than Caroline. My mother's small pearl earrings, the only piece of her jewellery I had taken from the old house on Elm before it was sold. I read Mum's letter again at the kitchen table. I read Dad's letter once. I put them both back inside the cedar box and locked it. At 5:30, Marge knocked on my door. I told her I'd meet her downstairs at 6:15. She was already there in a crisp flitting suit and a simple gold chain, looking like a lawyer who'd won 1,000 cases and was never late for court. "You ready, kiddo?" "I hope so." She studied my face for a moment too long, then gave a firm nod. As the elevator descended, the floor numbers lit up one by one. It was just the 2 of us inside. Eleanor glanced at her reflection in the polished steel. "You have nothing to prove tonight, Amelia. Just remember you own your apartment. They don't." "I don't need to prove I belong," I whispered, mostly to myself. "I just have to remember that I do." She turned, her eyes meeting mine, and nodded once as the doors slid open to the lobby. Jessica was already waiting by the concierge desk, a slim leather briefcase tucked under her arm. So was David, the doorman, who gave me a subtle thumbs up that meant more to me than he could ever know. And so was Leo. So was Chloe. So was Sharon, clutching an enormous potted orchid with a gaudy ribbon tied around it. And so was Greg in his shiny realtor's blazer with a tacky brokerage pin on the lapel. They were all waiting. This is the part that I played over and over in my head for months. If you've ever been made to feel like a burden by your own family, this is the moment you wish you could give them. If this story is ringing a bell for you, hit that subscribe button before we head into this ambush. And tell me in the comments, who's the Sharon in your life? The grand lobby of the Waterford residences had been converted into a makeshift party room. 6 round tables with white linens, simple centerpieces of baby's breath in glass jars, a charcuterie board as big as a car tire, and sparkling cider in tall pitchers. Smooth jazz whispered from a hidden speaker, the kind of music designed to be ignored. Around 40 residents were mingling older couples, a few young parents from the 5th floor with their toddlers in tow. Mrs. Peterson, the HOA president, a sharp 60-something retired CPA, wore a silk blouse and had her hair in a perfect bun. She called for everyone's attention to welcome the 3 new tenants who'd moved in that month. And finally, she said with a warm smile, our newest neighbour Amelia Vance in Unit 18B. Amelia, give us a wave! I waved. A ripple of polite applause followed. I sat down at Eleanor S. table 4. Jessica sat to my left, Eleanor to my right. The 2 empty chairs at our table remained empty. At 6:20, the main doors swung open. Sharon entered first, holding the orchid out like a trophy. Leo followed her, then Chloe, then Greg, the realtor. They were not on the guest list. They were not residents. Sharon marched directly toward Mrs. Peterson. We are so sorry to interrupt, Mrs. Peterson. We're family of the new resident, just here to show our familiar some support. Mrs. Peterson, caught off guard, did the only polite thing she could. She welcomed them in. Sharon placed the orchid on a table next to the cheese display, the same orchid from Tuesday, the one she brought to my apartment with that passive-aggressive note tucked into the leaves. She'd brought it back tonight like a declaration of war. Beside me, Jessica didn't flinch. On my other side, Eleanor sat perfectly still. I didn't move. The jazz hummed on. Chloe scanned the room until her eyes landed on me. She headed for our table, wearing that saccharine smile of hers. Leo followed. Sharon followed. Greg trailed behind, eyeing the charcuterie board like a wolf. Sharon got to our table first, but she didn't sit. She placed a hand on the back of the empty chairs next to me, gripping the frame like it was a witness stand. Amelia, sweetheart, she said, her voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. We need to talk. Honey, you simply can't shut out your family. It's not good for your mental health, and it's terribly unfair to your brother. About 30 heads turned our way. The jazz music played on, completely unaware. Leo stepped up beside her, looking exhausted like a man who'd be dragged there by his wife and mother-in-law without any say in the matter. Amelia, he said, you took my half. You bought this place with our inheritance. You owe me a conversation. That's all I'm asking for. Chloe was on his other side. She did that thing she did at the memorial, a soft hand to her chest, her eyes instantly welling with tears. We have been trying so hard to be patient with you, Amelia. You won't answer our calls. Greg, by the cheese board, gave Mrs. Peterson a practiced smile, the kind of calmer man who sells property for a living perfects. We're just here to mediate, ma'am. No one wants any drama. Sharon raised her voice even more. Honey, she said, good families don't have secrets. You need to be the grown-up here. You don't need this luxury condo more than your brother's children do. The line landed exactly as she intended. The same words Leo had thrown at me in my own home just last Sunday. You don't need this place. Now it was dressed up as a mother-in-law's concern in front of 40 strangers. To my right, Eleanor slowly set down her glass of cider. To my left, Jessica was a statue. I looked at Sharon. I looked at Leo. I looked at Chloe. Then I looked at Greg, who at least had the decency to look away when our eyes met. The room was holding its breath. I reached down for the canvas tote bag at my feet and lifted it onto my lap. I opened it. The jazz track finally faded out on a long, mournful saxophone note, and a new one didn't start. I pulled 4 legal-sized envelopes from the bag, each one addressed by hand in black ink. I placed the tote on the floor, stood up, and took 6 steps to the centre of the room where they stood. I handed envelope A to Leo first. He took it automatically, the way you do when someone hands you something. He didn't open it, just stared at me. I handed envelope B to Chloe. She held it with both hands, like it was a fragile, unwanted gift. I gave envelope C to Sharon. Her hand trembled slightly as she took it. She was no longer gripping the chair. She held the envelope tight against her chest. Finally, I gave envelope D to Greg. He took it, glanced down at the front, and his face did something it was never supposed to do in public. It lost all its colour. I kept my voice down quite quiet. The room was so still you could hear the low hum of the ventilation. Inside each of these envelopes, I said, is the one thing you've all been demanding from me, Clarity. That's all I said. Jessica then stepped forward from our table. She already had her business card in her hand. She placed it on the table in front of Leo. Jessica Croft, she said, partner at Croft & Associates. I'm Amelia's legal counsel. I would strongly advise you to review those documents before saying another word. Leo hesitantly opened envelope A. The will was right on top. He stared at the cover page for a few seconds, then flipped to the codicil. He read the line about the primary caregiver. He turned to our father's letter 2 pages of his neat handwriting on notebook paper, and his expression crumbled in a way I hadn't seen since the funeral. For just a moment, his eyes glistened with tears. Dad wrote this? He whispered, his voice cracking. I just nodded. His lip began to tremble. He was about to speak, maybe to me, maybe to no one. Chloe snatched the letter from his grasp. She's faking it! Leo, these are forgeries. He slowly came back to reality, shaking his head. Chloe, he said softly, that's his handwriting. She whirled on him, her face twisting into a scowl. Leo, don't you dare be weak. She is playing you. We went over this. Sharon had her own envelope open now, holding the cease and desist letter in one hand, and Jessica's card in the other, her mouth agape. Greg had put his envelope down on the cheese board and was now staring at the tile floor. Sharon was the first to recover. She did what guilty people do when they're cornered. She got louder. This is a setup. You brought us here to embarrass us in front of all these people. I did not raise my voice. I stood my ground. Mrs. Miller, I said, using her last name. None of you were invited here tonight. You introduced yourselves to Mrs. Peterson as my family. There are 40 witnesses who heard you say it. At our table, Eleanor stood up. She was 71 years old and barely 5 feet tall, but she looked at Sharon with the authority of a Supreme Court justice. I heard her say it! Eleanor's voice rang out. Mrs. Peterson heard her say it. The couple from Unit 6B heard her say it. Mrs. Peterson, by the food table, gave a single, sharp nod. That is correct, I did. Chloe had switched tactics. The angry scowl vanished, replaced by theatrical tears that flowed instantly. Amelia, you have no idea what this has done to our family. To Leo. He cries himself to sleep at night. Don't you even care? Do you know the weight he has been carrying? I looked at Leo. He was staring at his shoes. Chloe, I said, is the only person in this lobby who has cried about my mother in front of me since she passed. My mother. Leo visited her 3 times in 14 months. The longest visit was 45 minutes. By the cheese board, Greg tried to play peacemaker. Hey, listen, why don't we all take this outside? Cool off for a minute. No one is going anywhere, Jessica said. Her voice was calm, conversational, but it carried across the silent room. The cease and desist order is effective now. Any future contact with my client will be handled by my office. The packet you are holding contains my direct line. I'll be available to talk on Monday morning. Diane held the envelope up to Caroline. This is harassment. You can't, I can, Caroline said, and I already have. Mrs. Caldwell, the citation for violating her privacy is right there on page 2. Diane fell silent. Trent hadn't moved an inch. He was folding his letter back up with the slow, deliberate hands of a man folding a flag at a funeral. He tucked the letter into his shirt pocket. Diane, her voice again, breathing heavily. "What do you have to say for yourself, Iris? In front of everyone, look at them all staring at you." And I did. I looked around the room. 40 residents, my new neighbours, the people I might live alongside for the next 20 years if I was lucky. All of them were still in their seats. All of them were watching. I looked at Trent. He looked right back at me. His eyes were red. He wasn't going to say he was sorry. I could see it. I could see all the years of his life just beneath the surface, his wife pulling on his arm. The mortgage. The debt from his truck lease. The kids he had with Whitney. The vacations he never took. The man he might have been was still in there, somewhere, but he'd have been buried for a long, long time. I looked at Diane. The lockbox explained everything, I told her quietly. You just chose not to listen. I turned around. I walked back to my table. I sat down right between Marge and Caroline. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then Whitney grabbed Trent's arm and pulled him toward the exit. He didn't fight it. Diane grabbed her purse off the floor. She turned back for her casserole dish. Bart, who hadn't been told what to do, instinctively picked up the green Pyrex dish and just held it. Diane blew right past him, heading for the door. Bart trailed after her, still holding the casserole. The doors swung shut behind them. 4 seconds of complete silence. Then Marge clapped her hands, just once, very quietly. Mrs. Hendley cleared her throat. "Well," she said, "shall we eat?" 28 days went by. The 4 cease and desist letters were delivered by certified mail the next Tuesday. The signed receipts were back within a week. Trent hired a lawyer in Greenville who called Caroline back within 48 hours, politely stating that his client would have no further contact. The lawyer billed Trent $620 and told him to shut up. Whitney unfollowed me on Instagram. Bart's draft listing for my condo vanished from the Zillow agent portal. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission opened an inquiry into Bart's aggressive solicitation and sent him a formal warning letter. No suspension. Diane sent me a single apology card in a pink envelope with a watercolor hummingbird on it. I read it once and didn't reply. I put it in a shoebox in my closet next to the cedar box. Trent sent one email. 4 lines, no subject. I read what Dad wrote. "I'm sorry I didn't read it sooner. I won't bother you. Hope you're okay." I saved the email in a folder I called Family. I did not respond. When I added it all up at the end of the month, here's what it cost. $1,840 in legal fees, 4 letters served, $0 given up, and 0 more incidents. It bought me 1 quiet condo, 4 floors up, with a solid door and a deadbolt that actually worked. On the morning of the 29th day, I opened that cedar box again. I thought I knew everything inside it. The bird carving, the wedding ring, the old photos, the canvas pocket where Mom hid her letter. But that morning, just wanting to feel close to my parents for a minute, I lifted out the felt liner at the bottom of the box. Underneath was a small velvet pouch, the colour of an old red wine. I had never seen it in my entire life. Inside that pouch was my Mother S. silver locket, the one I thought had been sold with her other jewellery. She had kept it. She had hidden it here for me. When I opened it, the tiny photo inside was of me at age 6, sitting on my dad's lap on the front porch of our old house. I was holding a dripping ice cream cone. He was laughing. On the back of the velvet pouch, my mother had written 3 lines. "You are always enough, all by yourself. Don't ever forget. Love, Mom." I put the locket on. The chain was short. It rested right at my collarbone, like it was always meant to be there. Family isn't just who shares your name. It's whoever read your Father S. final wishes the first time and understood. That S my story. 1 lockbox, 4 envelopes, 40 witnesses, and 1 quiet locket I wear every day. If this story made you think about updating your own will or keeping legal copies in a safe place, please take it as a sign. Let me know in the comments and hit subscribe.